To discuss the plight of refugees in Turkey and across the globe, I'm joined now by Christina Velentza, a research fellow at the Migration Research Center at Koç University, and by Deniz Sert, who is an associate professor of international relations at Ozyegin University. Ladies, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Deniz, let me start with you. There are several 100,000 Syrian refugees in Turkey who are aged between 15 and 24. And overall, young Syrians make up nearly a quarter of the population in Syria, so in Turkey. So new orphanages, like we saw in Sarah's piece, while doing a great service, cannot accommodate the hundreds of thousands of children who need help. So what can be done on a mass scale to help those young Syrians?
Especially with those kids who were born in Turkey or who are in a younger age, I mean, we can say that they have a much easier time in terms of adapting into the Turkish language, and they have an easier time in actually getting into the Turkish national education system. And that's what we are hearing from the field. But as you mentioned, with those kids who are older and whose mother tongue is Arabic, it is usually much more of a complicated situation. I mean, either the resources are enough to actually deal with their problems, and also we are talking about a group of kids who are not only, lacking education, but they're also they have also gone through very traumatic experiences in general.
So is there a risk that we're likely to face a lost generation?
I personally think that there is a large risk of that, and it is related to many matters at the same time. Most of the families are dependent on their kids in terms of income generation as well. So given that age group, most of them find themselves obliged to work rather than getting a certain kind of an education either in a community center or in other places that are provided for the refugees. So, I mean, we have to have a more comprehensive approach, not only like tackling this issue as if it is only an education issue, but figuring out the economic side of this, as well as the psychological side of it. And also we have to change our approach as locals as well. Because you meet, like, for example, an employer who claims that he has a refugee kid working for him, like 6 days a week, 10 hours per day. And he says, well, if I don't employ him, without social security most of the time, you can imagine, if I don't employ him, he would be begging on the street. That's
a wrong approach.
That's a wrong approach.
Okay. Not humane.
Exactly. If you want to do something for that refugee kid, maybe you can actually help him to continue with his education.
Okay, before we start talking about the international scale, I want to take a look at some figures around the world. So globally, nearly 70 million people have been forcibly displaced. Of those, 40 million are internally displaced, 25 million have been forced to flee to other countries, while 3 million have become asylum seekers. More than half of the world's refugees come from just 3 countries: South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Syria. And the top refugee hosting countries include Turkey with 4 million, followed by Uganda, Pakistan, and Lebanon. Those are some startling numbers. So, Christina, the UNHCR even says that more people are living as refugees now than any time since the Second World War. So, apart from Syria, can you explain some other troubled spots in the world today and potential ones in the near future?
Yeah, that's a very important point that you made, actually, because nowadays what we're hearing in the media and also in the policy world, it's mostly about the Syrian crisis and the Syrian displacement. But if we want to be precise enough, we need to be aware of what's going on around the world. And as you very well mentioned, displacement is not something that happens only in the Mediterranean region. Displacement happens in other corners of the world that they're not so nearby, but we have to be aware that this is happening. As you said, of course, the Rohingya crisis is a very big crisis, a very big number of people, of Rohingya refugees who were displaced, and nobody wanted to take them. So we see that there is a lack of responsibility sharing even amongst the states who are near the crisis where displacement happens. And this is one of the very crucial issues that we have to consider.
So if we get back to Turkey, Deniz, Turkey currently hosts more refugees than any other country in the world, 4th million at last count, and a majority of them are Syrians. But several 100,000 have come from other countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. So how did Turkey come to host so many refugees? And how are these people faring, being so far from home?
Well, I would like to clarify one thing. We keep on referring to these people like as refugees. I totally understand that we are using it as a sociological category, like these people are running away from persecution, war, and violence. But at the same time, we should underline that in Turkey, in fact, there are very few refugees in terms of the legal status. I mean, most of the Syrians in Turkey, I mean, almost all of them, of the 3.6 million, are under a temporary protection regime. And that's a very important nuance that we should underline because...
yeah, we're going to get back to it when we talk about the integration of the refugees. But as I asked you, how are they faring?
So basically the rest of the group are also like like people who are seeking international protection, but they don't have a status. The first issue that we should tackle in that sense should be the status issue. Because we might be giving a wrong impression when we keep on mentioning as if they are all refugees and they have the status.
They're not legally refugees.
Yeah.
So Christina, one potential humanitarian catastrophe could happen in the Syrian province of Idlib, which is the last rebel stronghold, and millions of people fled the brutality of Bashar al-Assad, are now holed up there. And so regime attacks on the province have stepped up in April, and now there are fears are growing that millions of people could stream across the border in Turkey. Is it likely to happen? And if it did, would Turkey be able to cope with it? What do you think?
I mean, when you are in a situation of conflict, of a humanitarian disaster, everything can happen anytime. So what you're saying, yeah, it might be a very potential thing to happen in the future. I mean, the war is not over, so we cannot exclude any possibility, you know, for people who want to escape, who want to see their lives.
But is that something that Turkey can handle on its own?
That's another point and very interesting issue that you raise. I think Turkey right now is really overwhelmed. The system is really drained. As Deniz very well said, we need to be a bit careful with the classification of the categories. The 3.6 million are not all of them refugees. But of course, those who, let's say, potentially escape Idlib, they're going to be in need of protection. So somebody has to protect them. I'm not sure if Turkey is eager, let's say in a hypothesis, to host them. Of course, it's a practical also burden, let's say. But from a humanitarian perspective and from a legal perspective, again, you have other international actors and other states that are responsible to take them and to provide them protection and assistance.
Do you believe that they would step in?
No, it will probably be a safe zone.
Practically speaking, no, because all of them, yeah, they're talking about the safe zone and all this possibility of return in this safe zone.
Of course. So we've been discussing the plight of refugees across the globe and here in Turkey, but one area we haven't touched on yet is how governments are trying to integrate refugees in their countries. Now, we're going to take a look at that.